In the last few weeks, tens of thousands of people in Israel have been protesting Netanyahu's government for trying to reform the Supreme Court. Netanyahu won the Israeli elections by a landslide in November of 2022, and his voters are expecting him not to back down. So how did we get here? Why does the right in Israel want to reform the Supreme Court, while on the other side, the left is trying to keep things the way they are? Until 1994, the Israeli Supreme Court had minimum intervention with government policy. In 1995, Aaron Barak became the president of the Israeli Supreme Court. He saw the Supreme Court as an entity that can overrule the will of the people, even if the government that they voted for is acting by law. Because in Israel, the Supreme Court decided that a law might be legal, but not reasonable. Who decides what's reasonable? The Supreme Court. What is the reason based on? Their own subjective values. For example, during 2004, there was a building in Gaza that was overlooking Israeli roads. Palestinian terrorists used this building to shoot at Israelis driving nearby. Seeing that, the Israeli government, with a recommendation from the IDF, decided to demolish this building and compensate the people who live in it. The Supreme Court said that although it's a legal thing to do, it's not reasonable, and put a stop to it. Shortly after, Tali Chatuel, a Jewish woman who was pregnant, was shot to death together with her 4 daughters by Palestinian terrorists from that same building that the Supreme Court ordered not to be demolished. This is just one example out of many where the Supreme Court overruled the will of the people in matters of security, economics, immigration, and even where to draw Israel's borders. For many years, this frustrated millions of voters on the right who felt that their vote doesn't count because at the end of the day, the Supreme Court has the final say in how to run the country. And also that the Supreme Court cancels mostly their laws because the judges come from the left. So how do Supreme Court judges get elected? Basically, there's a committee of judges and politicians who decide who to nominate to the Supreme Court. But the judges have the power of veto, which bottom line means that they nominate their own successors. And naturally, when you nominate a successor, you want he or she to be as similar to you as possible. Take Supreme Court Judge Aaron Barak, for example. Aaron Barak is considered a very progressive judge. So when it was time to elect new judges to the Supreme Court, Aaron Barak nominated people who are considered to have a progressive agenda. This resulted in a Supreme Court that is viewed by millions as biased towards the left. Supreme Court Judge Aaron Barak described it accurately, and I quote, "The Supreme Court is a family, and we cannot let somebody outside the family into it." The goal in the planned reform of the Supreme Court is to make Israel more similar to most Western democracies, where the judges are elected by the majority, and to make it more diverse so it represents people from both the left and the right, and to ensure that the Supreme Court blocks government actions only based on law and not based on their own political beliefs.